In today's lesson, I am going to show how to make a simple but effective PowerPoint presentation for you to use when teaching remotely, but it is also applicable in live conferences or live teaching. I am using this PowerPoint presentation in another video that I'm going to give here. I'm focusing specifically on how to develop the PowerPoint presentation, and in another video that's going to be available to you is how you can use PowerPoint presentations in asynchronous video lessons where you might use a green screen so that you can appear right next to your slides and make those videos of PowerPoint presentations, or to make those PowerPoint presentations a little bit more engaging for your students or audiences. So the PowerPoint presentation is for generally asynchronous teaching videos or teaching videos generally. And so when you're developing a PowerPoint presentation, there are three things that I'm going to urge you to focus on. The first is making sure that your presentation has a roadmap. And so I'm going to spend some time talking about that roadmap. And I'm also going to talk about fonts and text, or font size and text. And then the third thing that I'm going to discuss in this lesson is the use of images. So today's lesson is going to focus on the importance of a roadmap, fonts and text together as a subject, and images. Now, the roadmap is very important, I think, for a number of reasons. I give presentations at conferences, and I use presentations in my courses. But roadmaps help to manage your audience's or your students' expectations. It lets them know a little bit more about what you're specifically or generally going to talk about. They'll have a general idea by the title of your presentation if you include a title in your presentation, but by giving them a roadmap, they'll have a little bit more information about what you're going to cover without getting super specific in the details about that. Now, I like to use, like I mentioned, I like to use PowerPoint presentations to help manage the audience's expectations. And sometimes that might be more useful when you're in front of a live audience, okay? Because managing expectations can also help the presenter. So, for instance, every time I give a presentation, even if it's on a regular basis for classes, I always get a little bit nervous. I get nervous enough that I never eat right before a presentation. So even if I have a presentation at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm not eating lunch right before then. Nothing bad has ever happened, but I get nervous enough that I feel uncomfortable eating right before a presentation. And if I'm giving a presentation in front of a live audience and I know very few people in the audience, that tends to make me even more nervous. And so I try to manage people's expectations by letting them know what I'm going to cover or how the presentation is organized. Now, my focus in this series of videos is for online or remote teaching during a crisis like the pandemic that we're in. But you can still use what I teach here in live or in-person presentations. And so there might be some things that you can do in a live presentation with an audience in front of you that might not necessarily make sense when you're doing a pre-recorded presentation that you make available to students, or even if you're doing it live but remotely where nobody's around you. For example, like I said, I tend to get nervous, especially when there are people that I don't know. And so the way that I might manage their expectations is I'll say, hey, here's the roadmap, or here are the topics or subjects that I'm going to cover in this presentation. And if my monotone voice puts you to sleep, at least that way you have a general idea of how much longer my presentation is. And that's always good for a few chuckles, but I found that it in some sense, it kind of lowers the expectations, and then it makes it easier for me to exceed those expectations and then feel better about the presentation. Anyway, so When you're doing your roadmap, you want to make sure that you identify, when you're giving your roadmap, you want to make sure that you identify for the audience the topics, subjects, or the issues that you're going to cover. So for here, I'm saying I identify them as topic 1 because, for you, it might be something different. And I'm going to make a version of this presentation available for you as a template. So you want to make sure that you identify the topics. I think it's generally good to use 3, but maybe not more than 4 topics. For purposes of this presentation, I am using or just identifying generally that there are 3 topics here. And I've done this already with this presentation by letting you know that I'm going to talk about a roadmap, fonts and size, and images. The roadmap gives some shape and organization to your presentation. And so you want to make sure that after you've developed your roadmap, that the format follows that roadmap. Okay? And so then you can give each topic its own slide or slides. So for here, I put topic 1, and everything, and there shouldn't be a whole lot, but whatever I put on that slide is specific to topic 1 or the first topic. I've seen other presenters put like 3 or 4 topics on one slide and then talk about those. I don't think that really helps with the organization and helping your audience or students kind of organize mentally your presentation by putting all of those together. I think it's better to just put each topic in its own slide. The only time where I would put more than one topic is like in a roadmap or when I'm kind of summarizing what I'm about to discuss. So like in a previous slide, I showed you the roadmap and I said, we're going to talk about the roadmap, font size, and images. That's the extent that I'll talk about different topics, but I'm really not going into detail. I'm just letting the topic is the roadmap and then letting the audience know that part of this, these are the elements of the roadmap. And that's about it. That's the only time that I would, for some people, perceivably put more than one topic. Generally, it's helpful that you keep, again, one topic each topic gets its own slide or slides. It's possible that you might need more than one slide for a topic. And so here, as you can see, we have topic 1, relevant text. If you need another slide to continue with topic 1, just give another slide, put a header for that topic, which should be the same as the previous slide, and add in other relevant text that you did not put in the previous slide. And then you do the same thing for topic 2. Now here in this particular slide, I put keywords. Keywords, relevant text, for me, it's all the same, but from teaching and giving presentations, I've learned that different terms resonate better with different people. So if relevant text didn't resonate with you in terms of what you should put there, maybe the word or the term keywords resonates better with you. And so what I mean by this is just use a few words that convey the general idea of the message that you're giving. Again, just focusing on keywords. And same thing for topic 3, keywords, relevant text. Now, here you'll see that the icon here has changed from the roadmap to this kind of font thing. And so that signals to your audience that you're changing the topic or you're transitioning to the next topic. And so with regards to font and text, but more specifically here for font, size matters for the font size. Okay, font size matters in your presentation. In addition to font size, the amount of text that you use in your presentation matters. And so I'm going to spend the next few moments talking about font size and the amount of text in your presentation slides. So with regards to size, use a large font size or a large size font. The font sizes that I use here are 180. So when I have the topic font, I like to keep that large. That one in this slide is 100. And the text that reads large font size is actually 80. I like to make sure when I give presentations that the subject and the key words that I'm using are a different size, so it's easier to distinguish, at least visually, that we have this general topic and then something more specific right below it. So with regards to size, I recommend using a large size font. One of my favorite authors, Guy Kawasaki, wrote, and I think it was in his book Enchantment, he talked about giving presentations. He said nothing larger or nothing smaller than 30 size font. And I used that for many years, and now I use something more closer to 100, maybe 80, but usually around 100. Moving on to the amount of text, less text is better. You may have seen presentations where people put a lot of text in there. For me, there are a number of issues with putting a lot of text in a PowerPoint slide. And first, the more text that you put into a PowerPoint slide, the smaller the font size has to be in order to help get it in there. And some people will oftentimes get carried away and they'll put like entire passages. And if you've seen people do this, you might have seen, if you've seen presenters do that, you might have seen people in the audience start to squint, because they're having a hard time reading because the font size gets a lot more smaller. So that's one problem with putting too much text on there, is that it can be difficult to read and then therefore distracting. To me, the other part that makes it problematic to have a whole lot of text is that if you're putting, as a presenter, if you're putting a lot of text on there, it indicates that you want your audience to read what is on the screen. But if they're reading what's on the screen, it's very difficult for them to actually pay attention to what you're saying. So that's the other problem with it, and it doesn't really help with the organization. These slides, I think, are most effective when they're used as visual aids to complement your verbal messaging. And that's why it's helpful to use keywords so that you give audience members and students kind of like this general framework by using keywords, general terms, and then you complement or you fill in the gaps of those general terms by your verbalized, detailed, and maybe sometimes nuanced messaging. Okay, so the way that I like to think about it is when people build a house, they'll start with the foundation, but then they'll also start with the frame of a house. And then after they've got that frame secured and everything, then they put more specific things in there like electrical wiring, plumbing, insulation, drywall, whatever. And so I would encourage you to think about when you use PowerPoint presentations for helping to educate your students, that you think about these kind of general ideas that you convey using PowerPoint. And then what you say verbally helps students to kind of build that house in their minds with the lesson that you're teaching them, if that makes sense. Okay, so again, with font size, we want to have large font size, and then we want to keep the amount of text minimal and just really use the most important words that can help students kind of understand the general ideas that you're conveying, and then you complement those general ideas, or you develop those general ideas with the more specific details in your verbal messaging. And now this third icon here, again, it lets our audience know that we're transitioning to the next subject. You'll remember that this was for the images. And with regard to images, we want to make sure that we're using more images than what we might think is helpful. And we should also use large images. And so you can see that image of a camera. It fills up the whole screen, and then I've put a minimal amount of text over that. There are several sites on the internet where you can get images. The sites that I've used for this particular presentation are the Noun Project and Pexels. So I use the Noun project for getting the icons that I've used, and Pexels.com is where I get a good amount of free stock photos. Those are the three elements, the three general elements of this PowerPoint presentation lesson. This generally applies to other software, presentation software like Apple Pages. I used to use Apple Pages quite a bit, and then I somehow ended up just transitioning to PowerPoint. But I think, you can use PowerPoint on Mac computers, which is what I use, but you can also use them on Windows computers. But I haven't found anyone with a Windows computer who could look at Pages. And so oftentimes I try to share my PowerPoint presentations, so I'll use that. But if you are using Pages, you can still apply these general principles, and you can always export your Pages presentation to a PowerPoint format. And it's always helpful, I think, to maybe encourage students to ask questions. And so like here I have a question mark image, but give students or audience members an opportunity to ask questions. One thing that I like to do in particular that I think works less in pre-recorded PowerPoint presentations and primarily work best in live presentations with a live audience, or maybe in a live online presentation where it's in real time, is when you're developing your PowerPoint presentation, consider anticipating potential questions that audience members or students might have. Or you could also design your PowerPoint presentation to try to encourage certain questions without actually asking those or talking about those questions in the presentation. That's a little bit more tricky, but if you can try to anticipate some of the questions, something that can be fun to do is to make slides for those anticipated questions. And when or if those questions come up, after you've got like your questions page or it looks like your presentation is finished, being able to click over to the relevant slide that's got the anticipated question that has actually been asked, it tends to be fun to actually go there. I do that quite a bit. One of the first times I did that at a job where I gave presentations every once in a while, I remember having these anticipated question slides with answers in mind. I got a question from a work colleague, and as I was verbally responding, I was clicking to the slide that had the relevant information on it, and someone else was like, "Whoa, how'd you do that?" And I was like, "Excuse me?" He's like, "How'd you do that?" And I was like, "How'd I do what?" Like, "How'd you get that slide up there?" Like, they asked the question and you had a slide up there. And I said, we can talk about that later. But he goes, "But where did that phantom slide come up?" And I'd never heard anybody say that. So it can be a little bit fun. I think it can also make the presentations a little bit more engaging if you're able to do that, or at least the discussion after the presentation. So that's my presentation. What I'm going to show you now is how I went about making the presentation with slides, and I'm also going to make a template available for you. If you have any questions, please feel free to post those questions in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer them either in the comments or in a subsequent video.